Damien Moretti stood alone at the floor-to-ceiling window of his penthouse, watching snow fall across the Hudson River while $3 billion slipped through his fingers because he refused to fake a wedding. 22 days until the Vescari merger collapsed. 14 days until federal investigators finished connecting dots between his shipping routes and bodies washing up in Newark. And somewhere across the city, a quiet woman who arranged marriages for powerful strangers was about to accidentally dismantle everything he'd built by teaching a monster how to feel human again. This is the story of how Manhattan's most feared crime boss lost his empire, found his soul, and discovered that the deadliest weapon in the underworld isn't violence, it's vulnerability. If you want to see how far a man will fall when he finally stops pretending to be untouchable, stay with me until the end. Hit that like button and drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels. Eek. The Vescari patriarch's voice crackled through the encrypted line at 2 a.m. like gravel scraping concrete. You have until New Year's Eve, Moretti. Married, stable, respectable. Or the merger dies and your competitors inherit the Atlantic corridor. Damien stood motionless in his study wearing yesterday's clothes, phone pressed against his ear, staring at legal documents spread across mahogany that might as well have been written in his own blood. $3 billion in combined assets. Shipping routes from Montreal to Miami, casino networks stretching into 6 countries. All of it contingent on one humiliating condition. Prove you're not the cold-blooded psychopath everyone whispers about at charity galas. Get married. Understood, Damien said quietly. The line went dead. He set the phone down with the kind of precision that comes from a lifetime of controlling every muscle, every breath, every flicker of emotion that might betray weakness. His hand didn't shake. His jaw didn't tighten. 32 years of discipline had taught him that survival meant becoming a wall, impenetrable, silent, unmoved by anything resembling human need. But alone in that study with snowflakes drifting past bulletproof glass, Damien Moretti felt something he hadn't experienced since childhood. Panic. Not the kind that comes from federal raids or rival syndicates. The kind that comes from realizing you've spent 15 years building an empire on top of an empty foundation. He owned half of Manhattan's underground economy, controlled judges, senators, shipping magnates, casino owners. Men twice his age avoided eye contact when he walked into rooms. And he had nobody to call at 2 a.m. except the lawyers who billed him $600 an hour. His consigliere found him 3 hours later still standing at that window, watching dawn bleed across the skyline. You look like hell, Marco said, setting down espresso that Damien wouldn't drink. The Vescaris want proof I'm not damaged goods. So get engaged. Half the women in this city would sign a contract for access to your bank accounts. That's the problem. Damien turned from the window. They want it to look real. The old man spent 40 minutes lecturing me about the sanctity of family and emotional stability. He thinks I'm a sociopath. Marco didn't argue the point. There's a woman, he said instead. Runs a matchmaking service out of a brownstone on East 73rd. Old-fashioned, discreet. She arranges marriages for people who can't risk normal dating. I don't need a dating service. You need someone who understands transactional relationships, but knows how to make them look genuine. Marco pulled out his phone, scrolled, showed Damien a photograph of a narrow brownstone wedged between modern glass towers. She doesn't advertise, doesn't take new clients without referrals, doesn't care about money or reputation. Then why would she help me? Because you're going to lie to her. Damien studied the photograph. The brownstone looked like something preserved from another century. Ivy climbing brick, black iron gate, amber light glowing behind curtained windows. Completely out of place among the steel and glass monuments to modern greed. Set up a meeting, he said. The brownstone smelled like cedarwood, old books, and something else Damien couldn't identify at first. Later he'd realize it was the scent of a wood-burning fireplace. Something he hadn't encountered since his mother died when he was 17. The woman who answered the door looked nothing like he expected. No glamorous saleswoman in designer clothes. No calculating businesswoman sizing up his net worth. Just a tired-looking woman in her late 20s wearing a cream sweater and jeans, dark hair pulled into a messy knot, holding a mug of tea that had probably gone cold an hour ago. "Mr. Moretti," she said quietly. "Come in." Her office occupied the entire ground floor, floor-to-ceiling bookshelves crammed with leather-bound volumes. Antique furniture that looked comfortable instead of expensive, a fireplace crackling softly in the corner, bay windows overlooking a small garden where snow gathered on frozen rose bushes. Damien felt immediately uncomfortable. Not because of danger, he'd walked into rooms filled with armed men without flinching, but because this space felt intimate in a way that made his carefully constructed armor feel too heavy, too obvious, too ridiculous. "Sit anywhere," Celeste said, settling into a wingback chair near the fire. Damien chose the sofa across from her, spine straight, shoulders back, the posture of a man who never fully relaxes. A black cat emerged from beneath the bookshelf, studied him with yellow eyes, then disappeared back into shadows. "Marco said you help people find suitable marriages." "I introduce people who might otherwise never meet," Celeste corrected gently. "What happens after that is up to them." "I need a wife before New Year's Eve." The words came out flat. Transactional. Damien watched her face for judgment, calculation, greed, the reactions he knew how to navigate. Instead, Celeste just looked sad. "Why?" she asked. "Does it matter?" "It's the only thing that matters, Mr. Moretti." Nobody had asked him that question. Not Marco, not the lawyers, not the Viscari patriarch who delivered the ultimatum like a prison sentence. They'd all treated marriage as a problem requiring a solution, not a choice requiring a reason. "Business merger," Damien said finally. "The other party wants assurances I'm stable." "And are you?" "Stable?" "Yes." He almost laughed. Stable. The man who'd inherited his father's organization at 23 after watching him survive an assassination attempt that left him paralyzed. The man who'd spent 9 years consolidating power through calculated violence and strategic alliances. The man who slept 4 hours a night with a loaded Glock on the nightstand and hadn't taken a vacation since 2019. "Depends on your definition," Damien said. Celeste set down her tea, folded her hands in her lap, looked at him with eyes that were too clear, too direct, too uncomfortable. "I don't arrange transactional marriages, Mr. Moretti. I arrange honest ones. I can pay whatever you want." "I'm sure you can." "Then what's the problem?" "The problem is you're lying to yourself about what you need." She stood, walked to the bookshelf, pulled out a leather journal. "Every person who walks through that door tells me the same story. They need a spouse for business reasons, social reasons, family pressure, immigration status, tax benefits, and every single time what they actually need is someone who sees them as human instead of useful." Damien's jaw tightened. "You don't know anything about me. I know you arrived 20 minutes early and sat in your car outside because you were nervous about walking in. I know your right hand keeps moving toward your jacket where you probably carry a weapon. I know you haven't maintained eye contact for more than 3 seconds at a time since you sat down. And I know you're terrified I'm going to say no because you've already exhausted every other option." The accuracy felt like a physical blow. "So that's it?" Damien said. "You're refusing? I'm offering you something better than a business arrangement." Celeste returned to her chair, opened the journal. 7 introductions, 7 different women, each one carefully selected based on compatibility, values, lifestyle. You meet them, talk to them. Decide if any of them might be someone you could actually build a life with. "I don't have time for dating." You have 22 days, that's 3 weeks. Plenty of time for 7 conversations. "And if none of them work out?" "Then you'll have learned something about what you actually want instead of what you think you need." Celeste pulled a pen from behind her ear. "But here's the condition. You have to be honest. With them, with me, with yourself. If I find out you're using my clients as props in some scheme, I'll make sure every matchmaker in the tri-state area knows your name." Damien studied her. The quiet authority in her voice. The complete absence of fear. Most people in his world operated through intimidation, bribery, or manipulation. This woman seemed to function in an entirely different economy, one where honesty was currency and manipulation was bankruptcy. "Why do you care?" he asked. "Because 15 years ago, my mother sat in that same chair and told a 23-year-old crime boss that she'd help him find a wife." Celeste's voice went quiet. He lied to her. Used her service to legitimize a marriage that was really a money laundering scheme. When it fell apart, his organization blamed her for the failed alliance. She died 3 months later. Heart attack, stress-induced. The fire popped. Snow tapped against the windows. Damien felt the weight of her grief like stones in his chest. "I'm sorry," he said. "Don't be sorry. Just be honest." Celeste opened the journal to a blank page. "So tell me, Damien, when you imagine being married, what do you actually see?" Nobody had ever asked him that either. He'd spent weeks planning the logistics, researching potential alliance brides, analyzing which family connections would strengthen his position with the Vescaries. He'd treated the whole situation like a hostile takeover, identify the target, calculate the leverage, execute the acquisition. But what did he actually see? "I don't know," he admitted. "Then let's find out." For the next 90 minutes, Celeste asked questions that felt like surgery. What did he do in his spare time? What kept him awake at night? What his mother had been like before she died? What made him feel safe? What made him feel trapped? Whether he wanted children, whether he believed in permanence, whether he'd ever been in love. Damien answered as truthfully as he could, which wasn't very truthful at all. Years of deflection had turned honesty into a foreign language. But Celeste didn't push. She just listened, took notes, asked follow-up questions that gently exposed the gaps between what he said and what he meant. "Okay," she said finally. "I'll do it." "Just like that?" "Just like that. 7 introductions, starting this Friday. I'll send you details tomorrow." "What kind of women are we talking about?" "The kind who might actually understand you." Celeste closed the journal. "But I need you to promise me something." "What?" "Don't decide based on strategy. Don't calculate which one makes the most sense for business. Just pay attention to which conversations you don't want to end." Damien stood, extended his hand. Celeste shook it, her grip warm, firm, completely absent of the fear that usually accompanied physical contact with him. "Thank you," he said. "Don't thank me yet. This is going to be harder than you think." She had no idea how right she was. The first introduction happened 3 days later at a restaurant in Tribeca that catered to people who needed private dining rooms with soundproofing. Damien arrived 15 minutes early, scanned exits, noted security cameras, positioned himself with his back to the wall and clear sightlines to both doors. Survival instincts didn't shut off just because he was meeting a potential wife instead of a potential threat. The woman who walked in at 7:30 looked like she'd stepped out of a fashion magazine. Alessandra De Luca, daughter of a Sicilian don. 28 years old, fluent in 5 languages, law degree from Columbia, reputation for being as ruthless in courtrooms as her father was in backrooms. "You must be Damien," she said, extending a hand with blood-red nails. "And you must be Alessandra." She slid into the chair across from him with the kind of confidence that comes from growing up surrounded by armed men, ordered wine without looking at the menu, smiled like someone who knew exactly how beautiful she was and exactly how to use it. "So," Alessandra said once the waiter left, "Celeste tells me you're looking for a wife. And she tells me you're open to the possibility." "Open to the possibility?" I like that phrasing. Very diplomatic. She leaned back. "Let me save us both some time. I know who you are. I know what you do. My father's organization has been watching your expansion for 3 years. If we got married, it would solve a lot of territorial tension." That's refreshingly direct. "I don't believe in wasting time on romance when we're really talking about a merger." Alessandra sipped her wine. "But here's what I need to know. If we do this, are you going to expect me to play housewife? Because I have a career, a life, ambitions that don't involve waiting at home while you run an empire. I wouldn't expect anything you weren't willing to give." "Good, because I'm not interested in being owned." They talked for 2 hours. Alessandra was sharp, funny, completely unafraid of him. She understood the world he operated in because she'd grown up in it, knew the risks, knew the rewards, treated marriage like a corporate partnership, clearly defined roles, mutual benefit, exit strategies if things fell apart. It should have been perfect. But when Damien walked out of that restaurant at 10:30, he felt nothing except relief that it was over. The second introduction was worse. Victoria Chen worked as a trauma surgeon at Bellevue. 31 years old. Spent her night stitching up gunshot victims from Damien's own streets. She looked exhausted when she arrived at the coffee shop Celeste had chosen, dark circles under her eyes, hands that trembled slightly when she picked up her cup. I have 40 minutes, Victoria said. Then I'm back on shift. Understood. Celeste says you're looking for something real, are you? I'm trying to figure out what that means. Victoria studied him with the clinical assessment of someone who'd seen too much death to bother with small talk. I treat 3 or 4 shooting victims every week. Most of them are kids, 16, 17 years old. They come in bleeding out, terrified, calling for their mothers. You know what they all have in common? What? They all work for men like you. The accusation hung between them like smoke. I don't employ children, Damien said carefully. No. You just create the economy that makes it profitable for other people to employ them. Victoria set down her cup. I'm not judging you. I patched up my own brother twice before he got smart and left the life. I understand how these things work. But if we're going to be honest, I need you to understand what I see every time I look at you. And what's that? The reason I chose emergency medicine instead of a comfortable private practice. They talked for 37 minutes. Victoria was brilliant, compassionate, completely incapable of pretending his world wasn't soaked in blood. She didn't hate him, but she couldn't separate the man sitting across from her from the violence that kept her operating room busy. When she left to return to the hospital, Damien sat alone in that coffee shop feeling like he'd just been autopsied while still alive. The third introduction was a disaster. Natasha Volkov was a celebrity influencer with 3 million Instagram followers and ties to Eastern European syndicates through her oligarch father. She showed up 90 minutes late wearing sunglasses indoors and immediately started filming their conversation for content. Damien walked out after 10 minutes. The fourth introduction was Isabelle Rousseau, a literature professor at NYU, who spent the entire dinner analyzing him like he was a character in a Russian novel. She quoted Dostoevsky, compared him to Raskolnikov, asked whether he'd ever experienced genuine guilt or just strategic regret. It felt less like a date and more like a philosophical interrogation. The fifth introduction never happened because the woman, a journalist who'd won a Pulitzer for exposing corruption, researched Damien's background and sent Celeste a polite email declining the introduction. By the time Damien returned to Celeste's brownstone 2 weeks into the process, he was ready to admit defeat. This isn't working, he said, pacing in front of her fireplace while she sat calmly in her chair. What specifically isn't working? All of it. Alessandra treats marriage like a business contract. Victoria sees me as the reason her emergency room stays busy. Natasha is performing for an audience that doesn't exist. Isabel wants to psychoanalyze me instead of actually knowing me. And what do you want? Damien stopped pacing. The question felt like a trap. I want someone who doesn't hate what I am, but doesn't pretend I'm something I'm not. That's a start. Celeste pulled out her journal. You have 2 introductions left. I think you should meet Elena Martinez next. She runs a nonprofit that helps formerly incarcerated people find housing and employment. Another person who's going to lecture me about morality. Another person who understands that the world isn't divided into heroes and villains. Celeste looked up. She spent 8 years in prison for killing her abusive husband, self-defense, but the jury didn't see it that way. When she got out, nobody would hire her. Nobody would rent to her. She built her organization from nothing because she knew what it felt like to be discarded by society. Something in Damien's chest tightened. When? He asked. Tomorrow. Riverside Park. She likes to walk while she talks. Elena Martinez was 43 years old with gray threading through black hair and hands scarred from years of manual labor. She showed up wearing a jacket too thin for December weather and carrying 2 sandwiches in a paper bag. Celeste said you probably skip lunch, Elena said, handing him one. Turkey and Swiss. Hope that works. They walked along the Hudson River while cold wind cut through Damien's expensive coat. Elena talked about her organization, the people she helped, the systemic failures that turned punishment into permanent exile. She didn't ask about his business, didn't probe his conscience, just treated him like a human being capable of listening. Can I ask you something? Damien said after 40 minutes of walking. Sure. Why did you agree to meet me? Celeste must have told you what I do. Elena stopped walking, looked out at the river where ice gathered along the banks. Because 15 years ago, a man I didn't know paid my legal fees when my public defender was about to let me plead guilty to second-degree murder. Anonymous donation. Covered everything. I found out later it came from someone in your organization. Never learned who, never learned why. But it saved my life. Damien felt his pulse quicken. He'd forgotten about that. His mother had seen the case on the news, told him it wasn't justice. He'd been 19 years old, barely involved in the family business, but he'd had access to enough money to make a difference. "That was you?" he said quietly. "That was me." Elena turned to face him. "So when Celeste told me Damien Moretti wanted to meet, I figured I owed him a sandwich and an honest conversation." They talked for another hour. Not about marriage, not about compatibility, just about the strange mathematics of guilt and redemption, how one good choice didn't erase bad ones, how carrying weight made you stronger even when it crushed you. When they finally parted ways, Elena hugged him, brief, maternal, completely unexpected. "You're going to be okay," she said, "whatever you're running from." Damien stood alone on that riverbank, watching her walk away, feeling something crack open inside his chest. He returned to the brownstone that evening without an appointment. Celeste answered the door in paint-stained jeans and an oversized sweater, hair down around her shoulders, surprise on her face. "Damien, I wasn't expecting. I need to talk to you." She stepped aside. Let him in. The office felt different at night, quieter, more personal. The fire had burned down to embers. "What happened?" Celeste asked. "Elena." He struggled to find words. "She was different." "Different how?" "She didn't want anything from me, didn't fear me, didn't judge me. She just saw me." "And how did that feel?" Damien sat down on the sofa where he'd sat 3 weeks ago lying about why he needed a wife. The truth felt harder now, more dangerous. "Terrifying," he admitted. Celeste sat across from him, curled into her chair with her feet tucked under her. The cat emerged from somewhere, jumped into her lap, settled like it belonged there. "You have one introduction left," she said gently. "Do you want to meet her?" "Who is she?" "A kindergarten teacher from Queens, 29. Never been married. Grew up in foster care. Spends her weekends volunteering at animal shelters. She's kind, stable, and completely removed from your world. Everything Damien needed for the Vescari merger. Everything that should make sense." "Set it up," he said. But walking out of that brownstone into the December cold, Damien realized the real problem. He wasn't thinking about the kindergarten teacher, or Elena, or Alessandra. He was thinking about the woman who'd spent 3 weeks asking him questions nobody else cared enough to ask. The woman who brought him sandwiches and noticed when he stared at the river too long. The woman whose office felt more like home than his own penthouse. His phone buzzed. Text from Marco. "Viscari wants an answer by the 20th. You cutting it close. 5 days. 5 days to choose a wife, salvage a merger, and save an empire he'd built on silence and blood." Damien looked back at the brownstone where warm light glowed behind curtained windows, and realized with growing horror that the only woman he wanted to marry was the one he'd hired to find him someone else. The final introduction was scheduled for Thursday afternoon at a small cafe in Astoria. Sarah Chen, the kindergarten teacher from Queens, 29 years old, foster care survivor, animal shelter volunteer, everything the Viscari family wanted to see on paper. Damien sat across from her for 45 minutes, listening to stories about 5-year-olds learning to read and rescue dogs finding homes and community gardens in neighborhoods where nothing else grew. Sarah had a gentle smile and nervous hands that kept rearranging her napkin. She asked careful questions about his import business that made it clear Celeste had given her the sanitized version of his life. She was exactly what he needed, and he felt absolutely nothing. "This was lovely," Sarah said when they finished coffee. "Maybe we could do it again sometime." "Maybe," Damien lied. He watched her walk away toward the subway station, shoulders hunched against the cold, completely unaware that she'd just auditioned for a role in a transaction that would have destroyed her. His phone rang before he reached his car. "Well?" Marco's voice carried the edge of someone who'd been waiting 3 weeks for an answer. "It's not going to work." "Which one?" "Any of them." Silence on the line. Then, "You've got 72 hours before the Viscari deadline. What's the plan?" Damien leaned against the car, watching traffic churn past, horns blaring, people rushing, the whole city moving forward while he stood paralyzed. "I don't know," he admitted. Then figure it out, because if this merger collapses, we're not just losing money. The Colombo crew's been waiting for weakness. The feds have 3 grand juries circling. Your father's going to... I know what my father's going to do. Marco exhaled slowly. You want my advice? No. I'm giving it anyway. Pick the lawyer, Alessandra. She's smart, connected, understands the life. Sign the papers. Play house for 6 months. Divorce quietly after the merger closes. Nobody gets hurt. Except her. She knows what she's signing up for. It's a business arrangement. Clean, simple. Everybody walks away with what they want. Damien closed his eyes, saw Alessandra's blood-red nails, her calculating smile, the way she'd talked about marriage like a corporate acquisition. She'd survive the transaction, probably profit from it. But his mother's voice whispered from 15 years ago. Careful men build safe empires. Kind men build real lives. I need more time, Damien said. You're out of time. The line went dead. Damien drove to the brownstone without planning to. His hands just turned the wheel, navigated traffic, pulled up outside the iron gate, like the car knew where he needed to be even if he didn't. Lights glowed behind the curtained windows. He could see shadows moving inside. Celeste, probably working late, organizing files, preparing for the next broken soul who'd walk through her door, claiming they needed marriage when they really needed salvation. He should go home. Regroup. Make the logical choice. Instead, he got out of the car and knocked. Celeste answered wearing the same paint-stained jeans from the other night, hair piled on top of her head, reading glasses perched on her nose. She looked surprised, then concerned. Damien, it's almost 9. I know. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have... Come in. The office felt different at night, smaller, more intimate. The fire had burned down to glowing coals. Classical music played softly from somewhere. The cat watched him from its perch on the bookshelf with unblinking yellow eyes. How did it go with Sarah? Celeste asked, gesturing toward the sofa. Damien sat, rubbed his face with both hands, felt the weight of 3 weeks pressing down like concrete. She was perfect. But I spent the entire conversation wishing I was somewhere else. Celeste settled into her chair across from him, tucked her legs beneath her, waited with the patience of someone who'd learned that silence was more powerful than questions. I have to give the Viscaris an answer by Sunday, Damien said finally. Pick a bride, announce the engagement, move forward with the merger. And you don't want to pick any of them? No. Why not? The question hung between them like smoke. Damien could feel his pulse in his throat, could feel the careful walls he'd spent 32 years building starting to crack. Because none of them are you. The words came out raw, unplanned, the kind of honesty that felt like bleeding. Celeste went very still. Damien, I know it's insane. I hired you to find me a wife, and somewhere in the past 3 weeks I stopped looking at the women you introduced me to and started looking for excuses to come back here, to this office, to these conversations, to the only person who's ever looked at me like I'm human instead of useful. You don't know me. I know you bring sandwiches to strangers. I know you inherited your mother's business and turned it into something honest. I know you notice when people stare at the river too long. I know your hands shake when you're nervous and you hide it by holding tea you don't drink. Celeste's eyes were bright, frightened. This isn't real, she said quietly. You're confusing gratitude with attraction. I asked you questions and you're mistaking that for connection. Then why are your hands shaking now? She looked down, saw the tremor, folded her hands together in her lap like she could hide the evidence. Because you're a dangerous man asking me dangerous questions, and I'm smart enough to know this ends badly. For who? For me. Her voice cracked. You don't get it, do you? You walk into my office, you tell me beautiful things, you look at me like I matter, and in 3 months you'll be back to running an empire, and I'll be the woman who was stupid enough to believe a crime boss wanted something real. That's not... Yes, it is. Celeste stood abruptly, crossed to the window, wrapped her arms around herself. My mother fell in love with a client once, believed him when he said he wanted to leave the life, helped him plan an exit strategy. He used her connections to fake his death, disappeared with $3 million, and left her holding evidence that made her an accessory to fraud. She spent 2 years fighting charges. It destroyed her reputation, destroyed her health. And you know what the worst part was? Yipaski. Damien didn't answer. She still loved him, even after everything. She died believing she'd just misunderstood. That if she'd been smarter, kinder, more patient, he would have chosen her. I'm not him. You're exactly him. You're desperate, you're cornered, and you're looking for an exit that doesn't cost you everything. And I'm the easy answer because I'm already here, already invested, already stupid enough to care. The accusation hit like a fist. You think I'm using you? I think you're using yourself, convincing yourself you feel something because it's easier than admitting you're about to marry someone you don't love for money and power. Damien stood, crossed the room until he was close enough to see the gold flecks in her eyes, close enough to smell lavender and wood smoke and fear. You want to know what I'm afraid of? He said quietly. Not the merger, not my father, not the feds. I'm afraid that you're right. That 3 months from now, I'll be standing in some penthouse next to a woman I chose for strategy instead of truth, and the only thing I'll feel is regret. Celeste's breath hitched. Then choose truth. I'm trying to. Not with me. I'm not part of this equation, Damien. I can't be. Why not? Because I'm not strong enough. The admission came out broken. I've spent 8 years building walls to protect myself from men who look at me like I'm fixable. And you're standing here asking me to tear them down for someone who might not even be here in 6 months. I'll be here? You don't know that. Then let me prove it. Celeste shook her head, stepped back, put distance between them like space could protect her from gravity. You need to leave, she whispered. Celeste, please, just go. Damien wanted to argue, wanted to push, wanted to do exactly what she'd accused him of, use desperation as leverage to get what he needed. Instead, he walked to the door, stopped with his hand on the knob. For what it's worth, he said without turning around, you're the first person in 15 years who made me remember what it feels like to want something that isn't power. He left before she could respond. The next morning, Lorenzo Moretti arrived at Damien's penthouse unannounced. Damien was standing at the window drinking coffee that had gone cold, staring at the city below, when his father's reflection appeared in the glass. The old man moved with the careful deliberation of someone whose body had betrayed him but whose mind remained sharp as broken glass. You look like shit, Lorenzo said. Good morning to you too. His father lowered himself into the leather chair near the window. The expensive ergonomic one Damien had bought after the shooting left Lorenzo's spine held together with titanium rods. The Viscaris called me last night, Lorenzo continued. Wanted to know if you were having second thoughts about the merger. What did you tell them? That my son doesn't have second thoughts. He makes decisions and executes them. Lorenzo's eyes were ice. So imagine my surprise when they said, you've been interviewing brides, like you're shopping for a car and still haven't chosen one. Damien set down his coffee, turned to face his father properly. The deadline is Sunday. The deadline is whenever I say it is. You're making us look weak. I'm being careful. You're being sentimental. Lorenzo's hand tightened on the arm of his chair. Let me tell you about sentiment. It gets people killed. It makes empires vulnerable. It turns men into targets. Is that what happened to you? The question landed like a blade. Lorenzo went very quiet. When he spoke again, his voice carried the weight of old wounds. You want to know what happened to me? I fell in love, your mother, beautiful, intelligent, completely unsuited for this life. I married her anyway because I was young and stupid and convinced love was stronger than bullets. And you know what it got me? 15 years of watching her slowly break under the weight of what I was. Watching her smile fade. Watching her learn to lie to herself. Watching her die at 43 from stress that might as well have been a gun to her head. Damien's throat tightened. She loved you. She did. And it destroyed her. Lorenzo leaned forward. That's the lesson you're supposed to learn. Marriage in our world isn't about love. It's about strategy, alliances, survival. You want companionship? Buy it. You want comfort? Hire it. But you don't build an empire on feelings that change with the weather. Then why did you marry her? Because I was weak, like you're being weak right now. I'm not. Yes, you are. Lorenzo's voice cut like wire. Marco told me about the matchmaker, the little office in the brownstone. The civilian who's been filling your head with romantic bullshit. Damien's pulse spiked. Marco needs to learn discretion. Marco's trying to save you from yourself. And so am I. His father stood slowly, pain flickering across his face. I already solved this problem for you. Alessandra De Luca. Perfect alliance. Her father controls shipping through Palermo. Merge our operations. We own the eastern seaboard. She's smart, capable, understands the life. Sign the papers. Announce the engagement. Move on. I don't love her. Good. Love is a liability. Affection is enough. Respect is better. But love? Lorenzo shook his head. Love makes you careless, and careless men don't survive. He moved toward the door, then stopped. The matchmaker, he said quietly. Stay away from her. Whatever you think you feel, it's not real. It's desperation dressed up as destiny. And if you drag that woman into our world, you'll kill her just like I killed your mother. Lorenzo left without waiting for a response. Damien stood alone in his penthouse, watching his father's reflection disappear, feeling something cold settle into his chest. His phone buzzed. Text from Celeste. We need to talk. Can you come by today? He stared at the message. Remembered her voice last night. You're using yourself. Convincing yourself you feel something because it's easier than admitting you're about to marry someone you don't love. Maybe his father was right. Maybe Celeste was right. Maybe the smartest thing he could do was choose strategy over sentiment and learn to live with the emptiness. But his hands were already texting back. When? The brownstone felt different in afternoon light. Harsher, less forgiving. Celeste had pulled her hair back severely, wore a black sweater that looked like armor, kept 3 feet of distance between them at all times. I owe you an apology, she said as soon as he sat down. Last night, I said things that weren't fair. You came to me for help, and I turned it into something personal. You were protecting yourself. I was being cruel. She folded her hands in her lap. But I meant what I said. I can't be part of this decision. It's not ethical, it's not safe, and it's not fair to either of us. Damien felt the walls going back up. Professionalism replacing honesty. The same retreat he'd watched happen with everyone else in his life. Okay, he said quietly, but I do have a suggestion. Celeste pulled out her journal. Alessandra. She's the logical choice. She understands your world. She wants the alliance, and she won't expect emotional availability you can't give. It's clean. It's strategic. It protects everyone. You sound like my father. Maybe your father's right. The words hit harder than they should have. Is that really what you think? Damien asked. That I should marry someone I don't love because it's safer than taking a risk? I think you should marry someone who won't get destroyed by proximity to your life. Celeste's eyes were bright. And I think you should stop looking at me like I'm the answer when I'm really just the person asking the questions. What if you're both? Then we're both going to get hurt. Silence stretched between them. The fire crackled. The cat jumped from the bookshelf to the floor with a soft thud. I need to tell you something, Damien said finally, and I need you to just listen. Celeste nodded. My mother used to take me to Riverside Park when I was a kid, before everything. We'd sit on a bench and watch the river, and she'd tell me stories about all the places water travels, all the oceans it touches, all the different lives it moves through. She said people were like that too, that we're all connected by invisible currents, and the trick was paying attention to which direction pulled strongest. He paused, forced himself to maintain eye contact. For 15 years, I've been moving in one direction, building power, accumulating control, becoming someone people fear more than they respect. And 3 weeks ago, you asked me what I actually want from marriage, and I realized I've been moving in the wrong direction for so long, I don't even know what the right one looks like anymore. Damien, let me finish. His hands were shaking. He pressed them against his knees. Every woman you introduced me to was exactly what I should want. Smart, accomplished, compatible. But sitting across from them, all I could think about was how much I wanted to be sitting here instead, in this office, with you, talking about things that have nothing to do with strategy. I know it's not logical, I know it's complicated, I know you have every reason to say no, but if I'm going to make a choice that determines the next 50 years of my life, I need to know if the one person who makes me feel human even wants me to try. Celeste was crying, silent tears tracking down her face. You don't understand what you're asking, she whispered. Then explain it to me. You're asking me to believe you're different, that you won't use me, and discard me when the novelty wears off. That you won't prioritize your empire over my heart. That you won't wake up in 6 months and realize you made an emotional decision that compromised everything you built. I'm asking you to give me a chance to prove those things. And what happens when your father finds out? When your organization realizes you chose a civilian over an alliance? When the Viscaris pull the merger because the bride isn't politically useful? Then I lose the merger. Celeste shook her head. You don't mean that. I do. No, you don't, because you're desperate and romantic and convinced this is different. But when reality hits and you're hemorrhaging money and power and respect, you're going to resent me for costing you everything. Or maybe I'll finally have something worth protecting that isn't built on blood and silence. She stood abruptly, crossed to the window, pressed her forehead against the glass. I need time, she said. We're out of time. Then I need you to leave. Damien stood, walked to the door, stopped with his hand on the knob. One question, he said. What? If the merger didn't exist, if my father didn't exist, if none of the outside pressure existed, would you say yes? The silence stretched so long he thought she wouldn't answer. Then, barely audible, I don't know. It wasn't a no. It also wasn't a yes. Damien left before she could see how much that uncertainty devastated him. The Viscari reception was scheduled for Saturday night at the Harbor Club, 2 days before the merger deadline. Crystal chandeliers, string quartet, 200 guests dressed in tuxedos and gowns pretending they weren't celebrating a business transaction between criminal organizations. Damien arrived alone. Marco met him at the entrance wearing concern like a bad suit. Please tell me you made a decision, Marco said. I'm working on it. The Vescaris expect an announcement tonight. I know. Your father expects you to announce Alessandra. I know that too. So what's the plan? Damien straightened his bow tie, checked his reflection in the brass-frame mirror, saw his mother's eyes staring back, the same hazel she'd passed down along with a conscience he'd spent years trying to bury. Honestly, he said, I have no idea. The ballroom was everything he'd expected. Old money pretending to be legitimate, politicians pretending not to know who funded their campaigns, judges pretending the defendants they sentenced weren't in the same room wearing Armani. Alessandra De Luca stood near the bar wearing a red dress that looked like a declaration of war. She caught his eye, raised her champagne glass, smiled like someone who knew she'd already won. Across the room, the Viscari patriarch held court surrounded by his inner circle. Silver hair, sharp eyes. The kind of man who'd survived 60 years in the underworld by being smarter than everyone and more ruthless when it counted. Damien was halfway across the ballroom when he saw her. Celeste, standing near a marble column wearing a wine-colored dress that made her look like she'd stepped out of another era. Hair down, minimal jewelry, eyes that found his across 200 people and held. His heart stopped. Marco grabbed his elbow. What is she doing here? I don't know. Did you invite her? No. But someone had. Damien started moving toward her, muscle memory overriding thought, when his father stepped into his path. Lorenzo Moretti looked like a king inspecting territory, tuxedo perfectly tailored to hide the brace supporting his spine, walking stick that was more weapon than medical device, expression that could cut diamonds. Interesting guest list, Lorenzo said quietly. I didn't know she'd be here. Liar. His father's eyes were ice. You've been making stupid decisions all week. Don't cap it off with a public disaster. I'm not. Yes, you are. I can see it on your face. Whatever romantic bullshit you've been telling yourself, bury it right now. Walk over to Alessandra. Make small talk. Announce the engagement when the Viscaris give the signal. Salvage what's left of your credibility. And if I don't? Lorenzo leaned close enough that only Damien could hear. Then you lose everything. The merger. The organization's respect, my support, all of it. Over a woman who'll be gone in 6 months when she realizes what you actually are. Damien's jaw tightened. You don't know her? I don't need to. I've seen this story before. Hell, I lived it. And you know how it ended? Your mother in the ground and me in a wheelchair because I was too proud to choose survival over sentiment. That's not the same. It's exactly the same. And if you drag that girl into our world, you'll destroy her the same way I destroyed your mother. The only difference is you'll be doing it with your eyes open. Lorenzo turned and walked toward the Viscari table without waiting for a response. Damien stood frozen in the middle of the ballroom while conversation swirled around him. Political gossip, business deals, the white noise of powerful people pretending civility. He looked toward Celeste. She was watching him, waiting. He looked toward Alessandra. She was watching him too, smiling. He looked toward his father. Lorenzo was shaking hands with the Viscari patriarch, laughing, building bridges. And Damien Moretti, the most feared crime boss in Manhattan, realized he was standing at the exact center of a decision that would define the rest of his life. Choose power, or choose truth. Choose the empire, or choose the woman who made him remember what it felt like to be human. The string quartet started playing Vivaldi. Someone clinked a champagne glass. The Viscari patriarch stood, raising his glass toward Damien with expectant eyes. The entire ballroom went silent, and Damien walked toward Celeste. He heard Marco curse behind him, heard his father's intake of breath, heard the confused murmur ripple through 200 guests as the man who was supposed to announce his engagement to a powerful alliance bride crossed the ballroom toward a woman in a wine-colored dress who made him feel like maybe all the violence and silence had been protecting nothing worth keeping. Celeste's eyes widened as he approached. "Damien, what are you—" "Run," he said quietly. "What?" "I'm about to blow up my entire life. And if you're here when I do it, you're going to get caught in the blast, so run. Now, before I make this everyone's problem." Her breath caught. "You're choosing me?" "I'm choosing honesty, and hoping like hell you choose it too." For 3 seconds that felt like 3 years, Celeste just stared at him. Then she did the last thing he expected. She took his hand. "I'm not running," she whispered. And with those 3 words, she set fire to everything. The ballroom didn't explode. It froze. 200 guests went silent as Damien Moretti stood in the center of the Harbor Club, holding hands with a woman nobody recognized while his father's face turned to stone and Alessandra De Luca's champagne glass stopped halfway to her lips. The Viscari patriarch broke the silence first. "Mr. Moretti," his voice carried across the room like a blade sliding from its sheath. "We're waiting for your announcement." Damien felt Celeste's hand trembling in his, felt every eye in the room cataloging this moment, felt his entire empire balanced on whatever words came out of his mouth next. "There's been a change of plans," he said. The murmur that followed sounded like wasps swarming. Lorenzo pushed through the crowd, walking stick clicking against marble. Spine rigid despite the pain Damien knew each step cost him. "Excuse my son," Lorenzo said smoothly. "He's had a long week. Damien, why don't we step outside and—" "No!" Damien didn't look at his father, kept his eyes on the Viscari patriarch. "I appreciate the alliance, the opportunity, the faith you've shown in merging our operations, but I can't announce an engagement to someone I don't intend to marry." "Then who—" The old man's gaze shifted to Celeste. His eyes narrowed. "Who is this woman?" "Her name is Celeste Marlowe. She runs a matchmaking service on the Upper East Side, and over the past 3 weeks she's done something nobody else in my life has managed to do." "Which is?" "Made me remember I'm human." The words landed like gunshots. Alessandra set down her champagne with the careful precision of someone controlling rage. Crossed the ballroom until she stood 5 feet away, red dress blazing, eyes cold as January. "You're humiliating me," she said quietly, "in front of 200 people, over a civilian." "I'm sorry." "No, you're not. You're making a romantic gesture you'll regret in 6 months when reality sets in and you realize feelings don't pay for shipping routes." "Maybe not, but they might make the next 50 years worth living." Alessandra laughed, sharp, bitter, genuinely amused. "You're an idiot," she said. Then she turned to Celeste. "And you're a fool if you think this ends well." She walked away without another word. The Viscari patriarch stood slowly, straightened his jacket, fixed Damien with a look that had probably preceded executions. "You're throwing away $3 billion, he said. "I know. You're making enemies of families who could have been allies." "I know that too." "Then you're either the bravest man I've ever met or the stupidest." The old man picked up his champagne, studied Damien for a long moment. Then, incredibly, he smiled. "Good luck, Mr. Moretti. You're going to need it." He drank, set down the glass, walked out of the ballroom followed by his entire entourage. Just like that, the merger died. The guests started leaving in clusters. Politicians first. They couldn't afford to be photographed at a gathering that had just turned into a spectacle. Business associates next. Social climbers. Hangers-on. Within 15 minutes, the ballroom had emptied, except for Damien, Celeste, Marco, and Lorenzo. His father stood near the bar, both hands resting on his walking stick, face unreadable. "Well," Lorenzo said finally, "I hope she was worth it." "Dad, don't." The word cracked like a whip. "I gave you every chance, every warning, every piece of wisdom I learned from making the same mistake, and you threw it away for a woman you've known 3 weeks. It's not about—" "Yes, it is. It's about feelings, hormones. The delusion that love makes you stronger when all it does is make you vulnerable." Lorenzo's hands tightened on the walking stick. "You just cost us the Atlantic corridor. The Colombo crew's going to smell blood. The feds are going to push harder, and half our organization is going to start wondering if you're fit to lead. Then I'll prove them wrong." "How? By holding hands with your matchmaker while the empire collapses?" Damien felt Celeste flinch beside him. "She has a name," he said quietly. "I don't care." Lorenzo moved closer, each step deliberate, painful, filled with barely controlled fury. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to walk her to her car. Say goodnight. Come back Monday and start rebuilding what you just destroyed. And if you're smart, you'll never see her again." "That's not—" "I'm not asking. I'm telling you how this ends. Because I've been where you are. I chose love over strategy. And you know what I got? Your mother in the ground at 43 and a spine held together with metal rods because I was too distracted by feelings to see the threat coming. That wasn't her fault. It was mine, for being weak." Lorenzo's voice dropped to something raw. "Don't make my mistake, Damien. Walk away before you kill her too." He left without waiting for a response. The ballroom felt enormous suddenly, empty. Marco stood near the entrance, looking like he wanted to be anywhere else. "I'll have the car brought around," Marco said quietly. Then he was gone too. Damien and Celeste stood alone beneath crystal chandeliers while the string quartet packed up their instruments and waitstaff cleared champagne glasses from abandoned tables. "Your father's right," Celeste whispered. "No, he's not." "Damien, you just lost $3 billion. "I know." "You made enemies of powerful families." "I know." "Your organization is going to question your judgment." "I know all of it." He turned to face her. "And I'd do it again." Celeste's eyes were wet. "Why?" "Because for the first time in 15 years I made a decision based on what I wanted instead of what I was afraid of losing." "And what do you want?" "You." The word hung between them like a bridge neither of them knew how to cross. "I can't be the reason your empire falls apart," Celeste said. "You're not. I am. I'm the one who built everything on fear and violence instead of something worth protecting. You just helped me see it." "That's not—" She pressed her hands to her face. "This is too much, too fast. 3 weeks ago you walked into my office needing a transactional marriage, and now you're blowing up alliances because you think you feel something real." "I don't think. I know. You don't know anything. You're in crisis mode. Your brain is flooded with adrenaline and desperation, and you're confusing intensity with intimacy." "Then prove me wrong." "How?" "Go to dinner with me. Tomorrow night. No empire, no pressure, no timelines. Just two people trying to figure out if this is real." Celeste looked at him for a long moment. Damien could see the war happening behind her eyes, hope fighting caution, longing fighting survival instinct. "One dinner," she said finally. "One dinner. And if it's a disaster, then at least we'll know." She nodded slowly. Let him walk her to her car. Let him kiss her forehead before she drove away. Let him stand in the parking garage watching her taillights disappear while snow started falling and his phone buzzed with incoming texts from associates, allies, enemies, everyone who'd just watched him commit professional suicide on a ballroom floor. He ignored all of them, drove home alone, stood at his window watching the Hudson while Manhattan glittered below like broken glass, and wondered if his father was right, if he just destroyed everything for a feeling that would evaporate once reality set in. If Celeste would wake up tomorrow and realize she'd agreed to dinner with a man who'd just proven he made catastrophically bad decisions under pressure. His phone rang. Marco. Talk to me, Damien said. It's already started. 4 of our partners pulled out of pending deals. The Colombo crew put out feelers about territory redistribution, and your father called an emergency meeting of the senior leadership for Monday morning. What's the agenda? Evaluating whether you're fit to run the organization. The words hit like a fist. He's challenging my authority? He's protecting the empire. You just proved you'll choose personal feelings over strategic advantage. Half the organization thinks you're compromised. The other half thinks you're insane. What do you think? Marco was quiet for a long moment. I think you just bet everything on a woman you barely know. And I hope to God you're right. Because if you're wrong, we're all going to pay for it. The line went dead. Damien stood alone in his penthouse while the weight of the decision settled into his bones. He'd chosen truth over power, vulnerability over armor, a woman who made him feel human over an empire built on becoming something else. And now he'd find out if that choice would save him or destroy everything he'd spent 15 years building. The dinner was supposed to happen Sunday at a small Italian place in the West Village. No cameras, no reporters, no witnesses to whatever happened next. It never happened. Because Saturday morning at 6:15, 2 federal agents knocked on Damien's door with a warrant. Damien Moretti, you're under arrest for racketeering, money laundering, and conspiracy to commit murder. They read him his rights, while Marco stood in the hallway in sweatpants looking gut-punched. Put him in handcuffs. Walked him past neighbors who'd pretended not to know what he was as long as he was quiet about it. The processing took 4 hours. Fingerprints, photographs, interrogation rooms with fluorescent lights, and lawyers who spoke in careful legal language that meant absolutely nothing. His bail was set at $5 million. Marco posted it before lunch, but walking out of federal custody into the weak December sunlight, Damien knew the real damage wasn't the charges. It was the timing. Someone had tipped the feds, waited until he was at his most vulnerable, coordinated the arrest to happen the morning after the most public humiliation of his career. This wasn't routine law enforcement. This was a message. His phone buzzed, text from an unknown number. You chose the girl. Now you lose everything. Should have listened to your father. Damien stared at the message, ice spreading through his chest. Who has access to federal investigation timelines? He asked Marco. Why? Because this wasn't random. Marco's face went pale. You think someone inside? I think someone wanted me arrested the morning after I blew up the Viscari merger. Maximum damage, maximum humiliation, maximum evidence that I'm unfit to lead. Who? Damien pulled up his contacts, scrolled, stopped on a name, called his father. Lorenzo answered on the second ring. I heard, his father said. Unfortunate timing. Was it you? Silence. Did you tip the feds to arrest me the morning after I embarrassed the family? I don't know what you're talking about. Liar. Damien's hand tightened on the phone. You've been planning this, waiting for me to make a mistake big enough to justify removing me, and I handed it to you on a silver platter. You handed yourself to them by choosing sentiment over strategy. I just made sure the organization survives your poor judgment. The admission landed like a bullet. You used federal charges to stage a coup. I used your own weakness to protect what we built. The leadership meeting Monday isn't about evaluation. It's about transition. You're out, Damien, effective immediately. You can't. I already did. 60% of senior leadership signed off this morning. They watched you throw away $3 billion for a woman. They watched you get arrested 24 hours later. You think they trust you to navigate federal scrutiny while you're distracted by romance? Damien felt the floor dropping out. I'm still your son. You stopped being my son when you ignored every lesson I taught you about survival. Lorenzo's voice was ice. I gave you an empire. You threw it away for feelings. Now you get to learn what happens when careful men watch their sons destroy themselves. The line went dead. Damien stood on the courthouse steps while snow fell and Manhattan moved around him like he was already gone. His phone buzzed again. Text from Celeste. I saw the news. Are you okay? He stared at the message. Thought about calling her, telling her everything, asking her to run before his imploding life dragged her down too. Instead, he texted back, "Can't do dinner tonight. I'm sorry." 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. What happened? He didn't answer, turned off his phone, let Marco drive him back to the penthouse, where his mother's letter still sat in his desk drawer, and the Hudson River flowed past like it didn't care about empires or choices, or men who'd gambled everything on the possibility of being human. The emergency meeting happened Monday morning in the private room of a restaurant Lorenzo had owned for 30 years. Damien arrived early, took his seat at the head of the table, waited. 12 senior members of the organization filed in. Consiglieri, underbosses, capos who'd sworn loyalty to the Moretti family when Damien was still in high school. His father came last, sat at the opposite end of the table, looked at Damien with eyes that held no warmth, no recognition, no trace of the man who'd taught him to tie his shoes. "Gentlemen," Lorenzo said, "we have a problem." Nobody looked at Damien. Our current leadership has demonstrated catastrophic judgment. He destroyed a $3 billion alliance for personal reasons, created enemies of potential allies, drew federal attention at the worst possible time, and showed that he prioritizes emotional attachments over organizational survival. "That's not," Damien started. "Quiet." Lorenzo's voice cut like wire. "You'll get your chance to speak. Right now you listen." One of the underbosses, Vincent Calabresi, 58 years old, built like a concrete block, cleared his throat. "With respect, Lorenzo, your son has run this organization for 9 years. Expanded territory, increased revenue, handled threats decisively. One bad decision doesn't erase that." "One bad decision reveals character," Lorenzo countered. "And his character is compromised. He's thinking with his heart instead of his head. That gets people killed." Another voice spoke up. Michael Russo. Younger, more ambitious. "The feds arrested him on racketeering charges. If he goes to trial and loses, our entire operation gets exposed. We need leadership that isn't facing life in prison." "I'm not going to prison," Damien said quietly. "You don't know that," Russo shot back, "and we can't afford to wait and find out." "So what are you proposing?" Vincent asked. Lorenzo folded his hands on the table. Temporary removal. Damien steps back until the federal case resolves. I resume operational control with the Senior Leadership Council providing oversight. We stabilize our position, repair damaged alliances, weather the investigation. When it's over, we reassess. "And if the case doesn't resolve?" Damien asked. "If it drags on for years? You're asking me to hand over control with no guarantee I ever get it back. I'm asking you to put the organization ahead of your pride. This isn't about pride. This is about you using my arrest as cover to take back power. Your arrest is proof you can't be trusted with power." Lorenzo's voice was flat. "You made an enemy of the Vescari family. You humiliated yourself in front of 200 witnesses. You got arrested 24 hours later. Tell me, son, if someone else had done that, what would you do?" Damien felt the trap closing, because his father was right. If any other leader had made those decisions, Damien would have removed them without hesitation. "We vote," Vincent said quietly. "All in favor of temporary transition of leadership, raise your hands." Damien watched 9 hands go up. 3 stayed down. It wasn't even close. Lorenzo stood, buttoned his jacket, looked at his son across the table with something that might have been pity if it hadn't been buried under so much disappointment. "You're relieved of operational duties effective immediately," Lorenzo said. "Keep your title, keep your respect, but stay away from decision-making until the federal case concludes and we can evaluate whether you've learned anything from this disaster." "And the woman?" Russo asked. "What about her?" "She's a civilian, a liability. What if the feds use her to get leverage?" "They won't." Damien's voice was ice. "Because I'm not seeing her again." The words tasted like ash. Lorenzo studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "Smart choice. Maybe you're learning, after all." The meeting ended. The men filed out one by one, some avoiding Damien's eyes, some nodding respectfully, some looking relieved that the decision had been made. Marco was the last to leave. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "You voted against me. I voted for survival. Your father's right. You made bad decisions. This is the consequence." "So that's it? I just accept being sidelined?" "You accept reality. Fight the federal case. Keep your head down. Prove you can still lead. And maybe in a year, 2 years, they'll give you another chance. And if they don't? Marco didn't answer, just walked out, leaving Damien alone in the private room where his empire had just been taken away by 12 men and a father who valued survival over everything, including his own son. Damien's phone buzzed. Text from Celeste. "You've been avoiding me for 2 days. What's going on?" He stared at the message, thought about his father's words. "I chose love over strategy. Your mother died. I ended up in a wheelchair. Don't make my mistake." Thought about Russo's question. She's a civilian, a liability. Thought about what would happen if the feds started digging into Celeste's life, her business, her clients, what they might find, what they might use. Thought about Alessandra's warning. "You're a fool if you think this ends well." His hands moved before his brain caught up. "I made a mistake. This isn't going to work. I'm sorry." He hit send before he could change his mind. 3 dots appeared immediately, then disappeared, then appeared again, then nothing. Damien waited for her response, angry, hurt, confused, anything that would confirm she'd felt what he felt, and he'd just destroyed it. But no message came. He sat alone in that restaurant staring at his phone while the empire his father built continued operating without him, and the woman who'd made him remember how to be human disappeared into silence. And Damien Moretti realized with crushing certainty that he'd been wrong about everything. He'd thought choosing truth over power would save him. Instead, it had cost him both. Damien didn't sleep for 3 days. The federal case consumed him. Lawyers filed motions. Prosecutors leaked selective evidence to newspapers. His face appeared on the evening news beside words like organized crime and criminal enterprise and decades of corruption. Every morning brought fresh headlines. Every afternoon brought strategy sessions with attorneys who billed 4 figures an hour to tell him the same thing in different words. The government had evidence, the case was strong, fighting it would take years. And through all of it, his phone stayed silent. No messages from Celeste, no calls, no angry texts demanding an explanation for why he'd ended things over a 5-word message after blowing up his life to choose her. Just silence, which somehow hurt worse than anything else. Marco found him Thursday night still awake at 2 a.m, sitting in the dark staring at legal documents that might as well have been written in a foreign language. "You look like death," Marco said. "Feel worse? The lawyers think they can get the murder conspiracy charge dropped. The racketeering and money laundering are harder. They've got financial records going back 8 years. How long? Trial? 18 months minimum. If you lose, 25 to life." Damien set down the documents, pressed his palms against his eyes until he saw stars. "My father orchestrated this," he said quietly. "You don't know that." "Yes, I do. The timing's too perfect. He had someone inside the federal investigation feeding information, waited until I was at my weakest, coordinated the arrest to maximize damage. Even if that's true, what are you going to do about it? You're sidelined. He controls the organization. You fight him now, you lose everything." "I already lost everything." Marco was quiet for a moment. Then, "You could fix one thing." "What?" "Call her." "No." "Damien, she's better off without me. My father was right. I drag her into this and she becomes a target. The feds will use her. My enemies will use her. I'll destroy her the same way my father destroyed my mother. Or maybe she's strong enough to make her own choices about what risks she's willing to take. She already made her choice. She didn't respond to my message. That's the answer. You ended things over a text message after the most dramatic public declaration I've ever seen. You think she's sitting at home waiting for you to come to your senses? She's probably convinced you played her." The words hit like a punch. Because Marco was right. From Celeste's perspective, Damien had stood in a ballroom full of powerful people, chosen her over a $3 billion merger, then disappeared 48 hours later with a breakup text that explained nothing. She didn't know about the arrest, the coup, the federal charges. She just knew he'd abandoned her. "I need to talk to her," Damien said. "Now you're thinking clearly." But not yet. He stood, crossed to the window. Manhattan glittered below, millions of people living lives that didn't revolve around empires and violence and fathers who valued control over their own sons. First, I need to fix the federal case. Then I need to figure out who betrayed me. Then I need to prove to the organization I'm not compromised. And then? Then I'll see if she'll still talk to me. Marco shook his head. By then it might be too late. Then it's too late. But I won't ask her to stand beside me while I'm drowning. Friday morning, Damien's lead attorney called with news. We found something, Gerald Hoffman said. His voice carried the careful optimism of a lawyer who'd learned not to promise victories. The evidence they're using for the money laundering charges. Someone accessed those files from inside your organization, copied them, delivered them to federal investigators. Who? We don't know yet. But the metadata shows the access happened 3 weeks ago, right around the time you started meeting with potential wives. Damien's pulse spiked. 3 weeks ago. Right when he'd hired Celeste. Right when he'd started the process that led to choosing her over the merger. Someone knew, Damien said slowly, knew I was looking for a wife. Knew it meant I was vulnerable. Started feeding evidence to the feds to build a case they could weaponize at exactly the right moment. That's our theory. If we can prove it, we can argue the entire investigation was orchestrated by someone with a grudge. Taint the evidence. Maybe get the charges dropped. How long to prove it? Weeks? Maybe months. I don't have months. Then you better find another way to fight this. Damien hung up. Sat alone in his study, surrounded by his mother's books and his father's legacy and the ruins of an empire he'd almost destroyed for a woman who'd stopped answering his messages. His phone buzzed, text from an unknown number. You want to know who betrayed you? Riverside Park. 1 hour. Come alone. Damien stared at the message. Every instinct screamed trap, but he was out of options. Riverside Park was nearly empty at 11 on a Friday morning. December cold had driven most people indoors. A few joggers, dog walkers, homeless men sleeping on benches under piles of donated coats. Damien stood near the same bench where he'd sat with Elena Martinez 3 weeks ago, hands in his pockets, breath fogging, watching the Hudson flow past like time was something that happened to other people. Footsteps approached from behind. He turned and found himself face to face with Michael Russo, the ambitious underboss who'd been first to suggest removing Damien from leadership. You came, Russo said. You have information? I have a proposition. Russo sat on the bench, gestured for Damien to join him. Your father made a mistake. He thinks removing you protects the organization, but half the senior leadership only voted yes because they were scared of the federal case. They don't actually trust Lorenzo. He's old, sick, compromised by the same sentimentality he accuses you of having. Get to the point. The point is there's an opportunity here. Your father orchestrated your arrest, coordinated with someone inside the federal investigation. I can prove it. Damien's heart rate spiked. How? Because I'm the one who helped him do it. The admission landed like a grenade. You. Relax. I didn't feed the evidence. That was someone else. But I knew about it, helped coordinate the timing, made sure the arrest happened when it would cause maximum damage. Russo pulled out his phone, showed Damien a series of encrypted messages. Your father wanted you removed. I wanted you removed. We had the same goal. Why are you telling me this? Because I changed my mind. Russo pocketed the phone. I thought you were weak, compromised by feelings. But watching you choose that woman over $3 billion, that took more strength than I've seen from anyone in this organization in 20 years, including your father. So what do you want? I want to help you take back control. Expose Lorenzo. Prove he manipulated the federal investigation. Use it to discredit him with the senior leadership. Restore your position. In exchange for partnership. Your father runs the organization like it's still 1985. We need someone who understands how power works in the modern world. You do that. I do enforcement. We split decision-making 50-50. Damien studied Russo, the calculation in his eyes, the ambition barely contained beneath a veneer of loyalty. You're asking me to destroy my father. I'm asking you to save yourself and the organization. Lorenzo's living in the past. You're the future. Help me prove he orchestrated your arrest, and we can force him out. Legitimately, cleanly. And the woman? Russo shrugged. That's your business. You want to risk everything for a civilian? That's your choice. I don't care about your personal life. I care about leadership that doesn't sabotage itself. Damien's phone buzzed. Text from his lawyer. Federal prosecutor wants to meet. Says he has new evidence. Could be good or very bad. He looked at Russo, looked at the river. Thought about his father sitting in that restaurant telling 12 men that Damien was unfit to lead. Thought about spending the next 2 years fighting federal charges while Lorenzo rebuilt the empire in his own image. Thought about Celeste, somewhere across the city, convinced he'd used her and discarded her. What do you need from me? Damien asked. Russo smiled. The federal prosecutor's office was exactly what Damien expected. Fluorescent lights, cheap furniture, walls covered with commendations and photographs of important people shaking hands with lawyers who'd built careers destroying men like him. Assistant U.S. Attorney Sarah Chen, no relation to the kindergarten teacher, sat across from Damien and his legal team with the expression of someone holding a winning hand. Thank you for coming, she said. You didn't give me much choice. No, I didn't. She opened a folder, slid a photograph across the table. Do you know this man? Damien looked at the photo, felt his stomach drop. Vincent Calabrese, the underboss who'd voted against removing Damien from leadership. I know him, Damien said carefully. He's been cooperating with our investigation for 6 months, providing financial records, witness testimony, details about organizational structure. Chen smiled. He's the reason we have enough evidence to put you away for life. The room tilted. Vincent had been with the family for 30 years, had served under Lorenzo, had taught Damien how to read people, how to negotiate, how to survive in a world where trust was the rarest currency. And he'd been feeding the feds information for 6 months. What do you want? Damien asked. The same thing we always want. Cooperation. You testify against your father. Give us everything. Finances, operations, connections. Help us dismantle the entire organization. In exchange, we drop the murder conspiracy charge and recommend minimum sentencing on the rest. How minimum? 5 years? Out in 3 with good behavior. Damien's lawyer leaned close, whispered, It's a good deal. Best you're going to get. But Damien wasn't listening, because the pieces were finally falling into place. Vincent had been cooperating for 6 months, long before Damien hired Celeste, long before the Vescari merger, long before everything fell apart, which meant the federal investigation wasn't about his decision to choose Celeste. It was about something much bigger. Someone had been setting this up for months, and his father had known. I need to make a call, Damien said. We're in the middle of... I need to make a call now. Now. Chen studied him, then nodded. Damien stepped into the hallway, called Russo. Vincent's the informant, he said when Russo answered. What? Vincent Calabrese. He's been feeding the feds information for 6 months. They just showed me proof. Russo was quiet for a long moment. Then, your father knew. How do you know? Because 6 months ago, Vincent came to Lorenzo with concerns about expansion into digital currency. Said it was too risky, too much exposure. Lorenzo shut him down, hard, publicly humiliated him in front of the senior leadership. Russo's voice was tight. I thought Vincent just accepted it, but if he's been cooperating since then. Lorenzo drove him to it, created an enemy inside his own organization, then used Vincent's betrayal to build a case against me. Why? Because I was always going to be a threat. Young, ambitious. Different approach to leadership. My father spent 9 years watching me build power. He was just waiting for an excuse to take it back. So what do we do? Damien leaned against the wall, closed his eyes, felt the full weight of the trap his father had built. If he cooperated with the feds, he destroyed the organization and spent 5 years in prison. If he didn't cooperate, he went to trial and likely spent the rest of his life behind bars. Either way, Lorenzo won. We expose him, Damien said. How? Vincent's cooperating because he thinks Lorenzo's still in charge. But if we can prove Lorenzo orchestrated the federal case against me, Vincent's testimony becomes worthless. The entire investigation gets tainted. That won't make the charges disappear. No, but it might buy me enough time to survive. Damien opened his eyes. Can you get me a meeting with Vincent? He's in witness protection. Then get creative. Damien hung up, walked back into the prosecutor's office, sat down across from Chen with the kind of calm that came from having nothing left to lose. I need 72 hours, he said. For what? To consider your offer. If I'm going to betray my family, I need time to process what that means. Chen studied him. 48 hours. Then we move forward with or without you. Deal. Vincent Calabrese lived in a safe house in New Jersey under federal protection. 3 agents. Rotating shifts. Secure location. Russo got Damien inside by bribing one of the agents with enough money to retire. They arrived at 2 in the morning. Vincent answered the door in a bathrobe, looking 20 years older than he had at the emergency meeting. When he saw Damien, something flickered across his face. Guilt, fear, resignation. You shouldn't be here, Vincent said. Yet here I am. The feds will know. I don't care. Damien pushed past him into the safe house. Small, impersonal, the kind of place where identity went to die. 6 months, Vincent. You've been cooperating for 6 months. They had evidence, financial records, testimony from witnesses I didn't know existed. They were going to bury me. So you buried me instead. I tried to protect you. Vincent's voice cracked. I only gave them information about Lorenzo, the old operations, things that couldn't touch you. Then why am I facing life in prison? Because your father found out I was cooperating, threatened to kill my daughter if I didn't expand my testimony to include you. Said the only way to protect her was to make sure you went down first. The words hit like a freight train. He used your family to force you to betray me. I had no choice. There's always a choice. Not when it's your child. Vincent sat heavily on the couch, buried his face in his hands. I'm sorry. I know that doesn't mean anything, but I'm sorry. Damien stood in that anonymous safe house, looking at a man who'd been his mentor, his ally, his father's most trusted underboss. A man who'd been backed into a corner and made the only choice that mattered. Help me destroy him, Damien said quietly. Vincent looked up. What? My father. Help me prove he orchestrated this entire thing, forced you to cooperate, manipulated the federal investigation, used his own son as collateral damage to protect his position. I can't. He'll kill my daughter. He'll kill her anyway once you're no longer useful. You know how he operates. Loose ends get eliminated. Vincent's hands trembled. What do you want from me? Testimony. On record. Everything he threatened, everything he forced you to do. We take it to the prosecutors. Show them the entire investigation was compromised by Lorenzo's interference. That won't make your charges disappear. No. But it'll destroy his credibility. Fracture the organization, give me room to rebuild. Damien crouched in front of Vincent. You said you tried to protect me. Prove it. Help me fight back. For a long moment, Vincent just stared at him. Then slowly, he nodded. The emergency meeting happened Sunday morning. Same restaurant, same private room, same 12 men who'd voted to remove Damien from leadership. Except this time, Lorenzo wasn't controlling the narrative. Damien arrived first, set up a laptop, cued the video file Russo had helped him compile over the past 48 hours. The senior leadership filed in looking confused, wary, angry at being summoned with no explanation. Lorenzo came last, saw Damien at the head of the table, stopped in the doorway. What is this? Lorenzo asked. Accountability, Damien said. He hit play. The video showed Vincent Calabrese sitting in the New Jersey safe house at 3 in the morning with federal agents visible in the background. His voice was steady, despite the fear in his eyes. My name is Vincent Calabrese. I've been cooperating with federal investigators for 6 months under duress. Lorenzo Moretti discovered my cooperation and threatened to kill my daughter unless I expanded my testimony to include his son, Damien Moretti. Everything I've provided about Damien was given under threat of violence against my family. Lorenzo orchestrated the federal case against his own son to facilitate a leadership transition that would restore his control over the organization. The room went silent. On screen, Vincent continued, Lorenzo Moretti is the primary architect of the racketeering conspiracy the government is prosecuting. He manipulated a federal investigation to eliminate his son as a threat to his authority. Any testimony I've provided should be considered compromised by his interference. The video ended. 12 men stared at the blank screen. Lorenzo stood in the doorway, face carved from stone. This proves nothing, he said finally. It proves you're willing to destroy your own son to maintain power, Damien countered. It proves you manipulated a federal investigation. It proves every decision you've made in the past month was about control, not protection. I made those decisions to save the organization from your weakness. No, you made them because you're terrified of becoming irrelevant. Damien stood. You've spent 9 years watching me build something different, something that doesn't rely on your generation's tactics. And instead of stepping back gracefully, you orchestrated a coup using federal charges as cover. I did what was necessary. You sacrificed your son to protect your ego. The words hung in the air like smoke. Michael Russo spoke first. If this is true, if Lorenzo compromised the federal investigation, then every decision we've made based on his guidance is suspect. It's not true, Lorenzo said. Then explain Vincent's testimony, another voice said. Lorenzo's jaw tightened. Vincent's a liar trying to save himself. He's in witness protection, Damien said. He has nothing to gain from lying, but you have everything to gain from discrediting him. One by one, the men at the table started looking at Lorenzo differently, not with respect, with suspicion. We vote, Vincent Calabresi's replacement said quietly. All in favor of investigating Lorenzo's involvement in the federal case, raise your hands. 10 hands went up. Lorenzo stood rigid in the doorway, watching his empire fracture. You're making a mistake, he said. Maybe, Damien replied, but it's my mistake to make, not yours. Lorenzo turned and walked out without another word. For the first time in 9 years, Damien Moretti sat at the head of the table without his father's shadow looming behind him. But victory tasted like ash, because the federal case still existed. Vincent's testimony was still on record, and somewhere across the city, Celeste Marlowe was still convinced he'd abandoned her. His phone buzzed. Text from an unknown number. Congratulations, you destroyed your father. Now comes the hard part, living with what that cost you. Damien stared at the message, looked at the 12 men waiting for him to say something, looked at the future spreading out before him like an open wound, and realized that winning the war against his father was only the beginning. Now he had to win the war against himself. The federal prosecutors dropped the murder conspiracy charge on Tuesday. Vincent Calabresi's testimony, now officially tainted by Lorenzo's interference, had been the cornerstone of their case. Without it, they had circumstantial evidence and financial records that could mean anything or nothing depending on how good Damien's lawyers were. The racketeering and money laundering charges remained. Trial was set for April. Damien's attorneys projected 18 months of legal warfare, millions in fees, and a 50-50 chance of conviction. Better odds than life in prison. Worse than freedom. But none of that mattered as much as the message waiting on his phone when he left the federal building Wednesday morning. Text from Celeste. I saw the news. About your father, about Vincent, about all of it. Can we talk? Damien stood on the courthouse steps staring at those 9 words, while snow fell and Manhattan moved around him like he was invisible. He'd spent 2 weeks convinced she hated him, 2 weeks telling himself she was better off without him, 2 weeks burying the truth beneath layers of strategy and survival, and all the armor he'd built to keep himself from feeling anything that might make him weak. But seeing her name on his screen cracked something open. His hands were shaking when he texted back. When? 3 dots appeared immediately. Now, the brownstone, please. He drove across the city in silence, hands gripping the steering wheel too tight, heart hammering against his ribs, practicing conversations that all fell apart before they reached his tongue. What was he supposed to say? That he'd ended things to protect her? That he'd been drowning and didn't want to drag her under? That every decision he'd made in the past 2 weeks had been calculated to keep her safe, even if it meant losing her? It all sounded like excuses. The brownstone looked exactly the same. Ivy climbing brick, black iron gate, amber light glowing behind curtained windows, a pocket of warmth in a city built on concrete and glass. Damien stood outside for 3 full minutes before he found the courage to knock. Celeste answered wearing jeans and an oversized sweater, hair pulled back, eyes rimmed red like she'd been crying recently. When she saw him, something flickered across her face, relief, anger, hurt, hope, all of it tangled together in an expression he couldn't read. Come in, she said quietly. The office felt different, colder somehow. Or maybe it was just that the last time he'd been here, his entire world hadn't been on fire. Celeste sat in her usual chair near the fireplace. Damien took the sofa across from her. The black cat watched from the bookshelf with unblinking yellow eyes. "You look terrible," Celeste said. "I've had a rough couple weeks." "I know. I've been following the news." She pulled her legs beneath her. "Your father orchestrated your arrest. Your most trusted underboss was an informant. You're facing federal charges that could put you in prison for decades. And somewhere in the middle of all that, you sent me a text message ending things with no explanation." "I'm sorry." "For which part?" "All of it." And Celeste's eyes were bright. "You stood in a ballroom full of powerful people and chose me, blew up a $3 billion merger, made enemies of families who could have been allies, and 48 hours later you disappeared like none of it meant anything." "It meant everything." "Then why did you end it?" "Because my father was right. The admission tasted like blood. I drag you into my world and you become a target. The feds use you for leverage. My enemies use you for revenge. I destroy you the same way. Don't." Her voice cracked. "Don't compare me to your mother. I'm not her. I didn't grow up sheltered. I didn't marry into this blind. I watched my mother get destroyed by a man who lied to her. I know exactly what kind of damage proximity to your life can cause." "Then you understand why I couldn't—" "No. I understand why you were scared. But scared and right aren't the same thing." Celeste leaned forward. "You want to know what hurt? Not the text message, not the silence, the fact that you made the choice for me. Decided I was too fragile to handle your life. Took away my agency because you were terrified of being your father." The words hit like a fist. "I was trying to protect you. I don't need protection. I need honesty." She stood, crossed to the window, wrapped her arms around herself. "You hired me to help you find a wife. I spent 3 weeks asking you questions about what you actually wanted. And you know what I learned?" "What?" "That you're terrified of being known. You've spent 15 years building walls so high nobody can see inside. And the second someone got close enough to notice the cracks, you panicked and pushed them away." Damien felt his throat tighten. "That's not—" "Yes, it is." Celeste turned to face him. "You chose me in that ballroom because it was romantic, dramatic, a grand gesture that made you feel like you were being brave. But the real bravery isn't the public declaration. It's the private choice to stay when things get hard, to trust someone enough to let them see you fall apart, to believe that love isn't a weakness that gets people killed. It's the only thing worth protecting." "My mother—" "Your mother married a man who never learned that lesson. Your father loved her, I believe that. But he loved power more. And instead of choosing between them, he tried to have both. That's what killed her, not love. The refusal to prioritize it." Damien stood, crossed the room until he was close enough to see gold flecks in her eyes. "I don't know how to do this," he said quietly. "I don't know how to be the person you need me to be." "I don't need you to be anyone except honest." Celeste's voice was barely above a whisper. "Tell me what you actually want. Not what you think is safe. Not what protects me from consequences I'm willing to accept. What do you want?" The question hung between them like a bridge made of glass. Damien thought about the past 2 weeks. The federal charges, the coup, the betrayal. His father's face when the organization turned against him. Vincent's testimony, the lawyers, the headlines, the empire fracturing. And through all of it, the one constant thought that kept surfacing no matter how deep he tried to bury it. He wanted her. Wanted the conversations that made him feel human. Wanted the way she looked at him like he was worth saving. Wanted the quiet warmth of this office, and the possibility that maybe, just maybe, he could build a life that wasn't constructed entirely from fear and violence. "I want you," he said. "I want to come home to this brownstone instead of an empty penthouse. I want to spend Tuesday evenings listening to you help other broken people find something worth holding on to. I want to wake up next to someone who knows exactly what I am and chooses me anyway. And I want to stop being terrified that wanting those things makes me weak." Celeste's eyes filled with tears. "It doesn't make you weak. My father would say otherwise. Your father spent 30 years choosing power over people. Look where it got him." She reached up, touched his face with warm hands. "You're not him, Damien. You never were. You just convinced yourself you had to be to survive. What if I can't change? What if you already have?" She kissed him before he could answer. It wasn't dramatic or desperate or anything like the movies made kissing look. It was quiet, careful. Two damaged people choosing each other despite every rational reason not to. When they finally pulled apart, Celeste rested her forehead against his. "I'm terrified," she whispered. "Of what?" "That 6 months from now you'll wake up and realize feelings aren't enough. That the Empire will demand something I can't give. That I'll watch you choose power over me and it'll destroy me the same way it destroyed my mother. I can't promise it'll be easy. I don't want easy. I want real. Then that's what I'll give you." Damien pulled back enough to look at her properly. "I have a federal trial in April. Lawyers think it'll drag on for over a year. If I lose, I go to prison for a decade minimum. My organization is fractured. My father's furious. Half the city thinks I'm insane for choosing you over the Viscari merger. And the prosecutors are going to dig into every aspect of my life looking for evidence." "Are you trying to scare me away?" "I'm trying to be honest about what you're signing up for." Celeste smiled, sad, knowing, brave in a way that made Damien's chest ache. "Then be honest about one more thing," she said. "If you could do it all over again, knowing everything that happened, would you still choose me in that ballroom?" Damien didn't hesitate. "Yes." "Then that's all I need to know." The federal trial began on a cold morning in April. Damien wore a suit his lawyers had chosen specifically to make him look respectable, trustworthy, nothing like the crime boss the prosecutors would spend the next 6 months trying to paint him as. Celeste sat in the gallery directly behind the defense table wearing a simple gray dress, hands folded in her lap, eyes steady. His father didn't attend. Lorenzo Moretti had disappeared from public view after the organization officially stripped him of operational authority. Rumors said he was living in a compound upstate. Some claimed he was dying. Others said he was planning a comeback. Damien didn't know and had stopped caring. The trial was exactly as brutal as his lawyers predicted. Prosecutors paraded witness after witness. Financial analysts explained shell corporations and money laundering schemes. Former associates testified about meetings where Damien had made decisions that skirted or crossed legal lines. Federal agents presented evidence of connections to criminal enterprises spanning 3 continents. Damien's defense team fought back hard, challenged every piece of evidence, discredited witnesses, argued that successful businessmen often had dealings with questionable people without being criminals themselves, highlighted Vincent Calabrese's compromised testimony and Lorenzo's interference to suggest the entire investigation was tainted. But the government's case was strong, and everyone in that courtroom knew it. The trial lasted 7 months. Every day, Damien sat at the defense table watching his life get dissected by strangers. Every night, he returned to the brownstone where Celeste waited with dinner and conversations about anything except federal charges. She never asked him if he was guilty, never demanded explanations for the evidence presented in court, just accepted that the man she loved had lived a complicated life and was now paying for it. "You're handling this better than I am," Damien said one night in September. They were sitting in the garden behind the brownstone watching stars appear above Manhattan's light pollution. "I'm terrified," Celeste admitted. "Every morning I wake up wondering if today's the day the jury decides you're going to prison. But being terrified doesn't mean I stop showing up." Why? "Because you showed up for me first, in that ballroom, when it would have been easier to choose power." She laced her fingers through his. "Now it's my turn." The verdict came on a Thursday in October. The jury deliberated for 4 days, long enough that Damien's lawyers started cautiously suggesting it might be a good sign. If the case had been clear-cut, they would have decided faster. But when the foreman stood to read the verdict, Damien's pulse was hammering so hard he could barely hear the words. "On the charge of racketeering, we find the defendant not guilty." The courtroom erupted. Damien's vision blurred. He felt Celeste's hand grip his shoulder from behind the barrier separating the gallery from the defense table. "On the charge of money laundering, we find the defendant guilty." The relief drained away. The judge set sentencing for 6 weeks later. Damien's lawyers immediately began preparing appeals. But walking out of that courtroom into October sunlight, Damien knew what was coming. Prison. Maybe not life, but years. Enough to matter. Celeste was waiting outside the courthouse, pressed herself against him hard enough he could feel her shaking. "We'll appeal," she said. "It won't matter." "Then we'll fight anyway." Damien pulled back, looked at her properly. This woman who'd spent 9 months sitting in courtrooms, fielding reporters' questions, dealing with speculation and gossip, and strangers who told her she was crazy for standing beside a convicted criminal. "You should leave," he said quietly, "before sentencing. While you still can, start fresh somewhere without my name attached to yours." Celeste's expression went cold. "Are you seriously doing this again?" "I'm being practical." "You're being a coward." She grabbed his jacket. "I sat through 7 months of testimony about your life. I know exactly what you are, what you've done, the choices you made. And I'm still here. So stop trying to make my decisions for me. I'm going to prison, Celeste. Then I'll visit, write letters. Wait." Her voice cracked. "But I won't walk away just because things got hard. That's not what love is. Love is supposed to protect people. No. Love is supposed to show up, even when it hurts, especially when it hurts." She pulled him close. "You chose me. Now let me choose you back." Sentencing happened the week before Thanksgiving. The judge gave Damien 4 years. Minimum security facility, eligible for parole after 30 months with good behavior. His lawyers called it a victory. They'd been expecting 7 to 10. But standing in that courtroom listening to the judge explain when and where he'd be surrendering his freedom, Damien felt something break inside his chest. 4 years. 4 years away from Celeste. 4 years while the organization rebuilt without him. 4 years to think about every choice that led to this moment. Celeste was crying when they read the sentence, silent tears tracking down her face. But when Damien looked back at her from the defense table, she smiled, and somehow that made it worse. The brownstone was quiet the night before Damien surrendered himself to federal custody. They didn't talk about prison, didn't discuss the appeals process or parole hearings or any of the logistics his lawyers had explained in excruciating detail. They just sat together in front of the fireplace drinking wine and pretending the morning wasn't coming. "I have something for you," Celeste said finally. She disappeared upstairs, returned carrying a leather journal identical to the one she used for client notes. "What is this?" Damien asked. "Your mother's letters." He stared at the journal. "I thought those were lost when my father moved after the shooting." "They were. I spent 6 months tracking them down. Called estate liquidators. Searched storage facilities. Finally found them in a box your father donated to a historical society." Celeste set the journal in his lap. "She wrote you 43 letters, 1 every month from the time you were born until she died. Your father never gave them to you. I think you should have them now." Damien opened the journal with trembling hands. His mother's handwriting filled the pages. Neat, familiar. The same script she'd used for grocery lists and birthday cards. He read the first entry. "My darling Damien, you're 3 months old today. Your father held you for the first time without looking terrified. Small victories. I want you to know something before the world teaches you otherwise. Careful men build safe empires, but kind men build real lives. Your father is teaching you the first. I hope I have time to teach you the second. All my love. Mom." Damien's vision blurred. "She knew," he whispered. "Even then, she knew what he was building me into." "She knew, and she tried to give you another path." Celeste sat beside him. "Read them while you're away. Remember, you have a choice about who you become." "I'm already becoming it." 4 years in prison doesn't exactly scream kind man building a real life. 4 years in prison means you're paying for mistakes. That's not the same as being defined by them. She took his hand. "You'll get through this. We'll get through this. And when you come out, we'll build something that isn't constructed from fear." "What if I can't?" "Then we'll figure it out together." They made love that night slowly, carefully, like they were memorizing each other. Afterward, Damien held her while she cried and pretended he wasn't crying too. In the morning, he surrendered himself to the federal marshals. The minimum security facility was 2 hours upstate. Clean, organized, nothing like the violent prison nightmares television portrayed. More like a militarized college campus where everyone wore the same clothes and followed the same schedule. Damien spent his first week in shock. The routine was suffocating. Wake at 6. Breakfast at 6:30. Work detail. Damien got assigned to the library from 8 until noon. Lunch. More work. Dinner. Rec time. Lights out at 10. Every day identical. Every day pushing him further from the life he'd built. But every week, Celeste visited. She drove 2 hours each way every Sunday. Sat across from him in the visitor's room for the maximum allowed time. Told him about the matchmaking business. Still running. Still helping people find honest connections. Told him about the organization. Marco was running things competently. The Viscari family had opened quiet negotiations about a potential future alliance. Told him about his father, alive, diminished, spending his days in that upstate compound surrounded by ghosts. Damien told her about the letters. He'd been reading one per week, rationing them, making them last. Each one revealed another layer of his mother's quiet wisdom. Her understanding that the world his father was building would eventually consume everyone near it. Her desperate hope that Damien might find another way. "She would have liked you," Damien said during one visit. "How do you know?" "Because you're exactly what she hoped I'd find. Someone brave enough to see past the armor." Celeste smiled. "When you get out, we should visit her grave. I'd like to tell her thank you." "For what?" "For raising a son who learned how to change." The months crawled past. Damien served his time, stayed out of trouble, read every book in the prison library, worked with his lawyers on appeals that went nowhere, wrote letters to Celeste every night, pages and pages of thoughts he'd never been able to articulate when he was drowning in empire building. Celeste wrote back every time. Her letters were lighter, funnier, filled with observations about clients, stories about the cat, descriptions of snow falling on the brownstone garden. Nothing heavy, nothing designed to make prison feel worse than it already did. Just proof that life continued outside these walls. That someone was waiting. Parole came after 28 months. 2 months early for good behavior and participation in education programs. Damien walked out of that facility on a cold March morning with the clothes he'd worn on surrender, his mother's journal, and a folder full of Celeste's letters. She was waiting in the parking lot, leaning against her car, hair longer than he remembered, smile brighter. When she saw him, she ran. They collided in the middle of the parking lot and held on to each other like drowning people finding shore. "You're out," she whispered. "I'm out. Welcome home." They drove back to Manhattan in comfortable silence. The city looked different, cleaner somehow. Or maybe it was just that Damien was seeing it through eyes that had spent 28 months looking at concrete walls. The brownstone was exactly as he remembered. Ivy climbing brick, black iron gate, amber light behind curtained windows. Home. Inside, the office had changed slightly. New photographs on the mantel, the cat older, grayer. But the fireplace still crackled. The books still lined the shelves, and Celeste still moved through the space like she'd built it from her own bones. "Marco wants to meet with you tomorrow," she said while making tea. "Talk about the organization, your role going forward." "What did you tell him?" "That you'd decide when you were ready." Damien stood at the window overlooking the garden. 28 months ago, he'd been running an empire. Now he was a convicted felon on federal parole trying to figure out what version of himself survived incarceration. "I don't know if I want to go back," he admitted. "To the organization, to any of it. The violence, the strategy, the constant calculation." He turned to face her. "Prison gave me time to think about what kind of life I actually want to build, and I don't think it's the one my father wanted for me." "So what do you want?" Damien crossed the room, took her hands. "I want to help you run this place. The matchmaking service. I want to sit across from broken people and help them find honest connections. I want to build something that doesn't require violence to protect. And I want to marry you, properly. Not because of business alliances or strategic advantages, because you're the only person who ever looked at me and saw someone worth saving." Celeste's eyes filled with tears. "Are you proposing?" "I'm promising, if you'll let me." "Yes." The word came out broken. "Beautiful." "Yes." They got married in July at the coastal estate in Maine where his mother had honeymooned 35 years earlier. Small ceremony, no reporters, no politicians, no mafia spectacle. Marco attended as best man. Elena Martinez came. Sarah Chen, the kindergarten teacher, brought her new girlfriend. Even Vincent Calabrese showed up, still in witness protection, still looking haunted. Lorenzo didn't come, But his absence felt like closure rather than abandonment. Celeste wore a simple white dress. Damien wore a suit that wasn't designed by lawyers. They exchanged vows under silver skies while ocean wind carried the scent of salt and possibility. Afterward, standing on the beach watching sunset paint the water gold, Celeste leaned against him. "Your mother was right," she said. "About what?" "Careful men build safe empires. Kind men build real lives." Damien thought about the past 3 years. The ballroom, the trial, the prison, the letters. This woman who'd chosen him despite every rational reason not to. "I think I'm finally learning the difference," he said. 3 years later, the brownstone still stood on East 73rd Street, but the brass plaque beside the door now read, Marlowe and Moretti. Introductions, honest connections for complicated lives. Every Tuesday, another exhausted soul sat on the velvet sofa claiming they needed a spouse for business reasons, social pressure, immigration status, loneliness dressed up as logic. And every single time, Celeste smiled gently before saying the words that had changed Damien Moretti's life. "No, you need to be seen first." Damien would watch from his desk across the room, still learning how to ask questions instead of giving orders, still figuring out how to be the kind man his mother had hoped would survive all the careful empire building. Some nights, after the last client left and the fire burned low, Celeste would find him reading his mother's letters. "Which one tonight?" she'd ask. "The last one, the one she wrote the week before she died." Celeste would settle beside him, rest her head on his shoulder, let him read it aloud. "My darling Damien, if you're reading this, I'm gone. And I'm sorry I didn't have more time to show you what love actually looks like. But I'll tell you now, it's not the grand gestures. It's not the dramatic sacrifices. It's showing up every day, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. Your father loved me. I believe that. But he loved power more. And in the end, that choice killed us both. You have a chance to be different, to build something that doesn't require blood to protect, to choose vulnerability over armor, to believe that being known is worth more than being feared. I hope you find someone brave enough to see you, really see you, the way I always did. All my love, always, Mom." Damien would fold the letter carefully, place it back in the journal, hold Celeste a little tighter. "She would have loved you," he'd say. "I know," Celeste would answer, "because you do." And in the quiet warmth of that brownstone, surrounded by books and firelight, and the possibility of building something honest, Damien Moretti finally understood what his mother had been trying to teach him all along. The strongest empires weren't built on fear. They were built on the courage to be vulnerable, on showing up even when it hurt, on choosing the people who saw you clearly and loved you anyway, on believing that sometimes the bravest thing a dangerous man could do was learn how to be gentle. And that was the empire worth protecting. Not the one built from blood and silence, but the one built from truth.